Sports, joined now by Max Olson of ESPN.com. And Max, first off, before we get into the nuts and bolts of the CFP and the schedule coming up and all those things, Bill Napier not getting fired. Were you surprised, or given all the factors at play, is it less surprising than it would appear?
Let me ask you: Are they rejoicing in Tallahassee and Coral Gables today?
I mean, I can't rejoice about anything. So, I mean, there are people who are like, yeah, sure, bring him back, like whatever. But yeah, I mean, 1-8 can't really taunt.
That's true. You can't talk any mess about that. Yeah, I think I'm sure people are a little bit surprised by the timing of this decision. But certainly it has seemed like one over the course of the season where I think Scott Strickland, probably in some ways similar to the situation in Waco. Like, I think Scott Strickland looked at this and wants his coach to succeed and wants to believe that this thing's pointing in the right direction. We've got young talent, and we don't have to kind of go through a change that would be, extremely expensive. And so, I think that they're looking at this and saying, if you fire Billy Napier, you're probably losing DJ Lagway, and you're losing a lot of top players off of this roster. And even if you bring in a Lane Kiffin or someone that knows how to recruit the portal, you're still really starting over. And so I think you combine that with the cost of not just having to pay a buyout to Billy Napier of $26 million with $13 million due in the first month, but the total cost of firing your staff and hiring somebody else probably exceeds $40 million. So I think they're looking at it and saying the better investment in the short term is let's get behind Billy Napier. Let's try to win now and spend more money on this roster next year, and try to get this thing flipped the way that Miami did and the way that others have in the portal, rather than kind of tear it all down. So, I'm sure others will look at that and kind of chuckle and say, he's not the guy. You can't have 3 losing seasons. Like, why would they give him another chance? And I just think I think they're kind of looking at this thing glass half full right now and thinking that coming off a very competitive game against Georgia, that maybe Billy Napier can figure it out there.
Well, interim president, an AD, and a football coach that all could be gone in a year anyway. It just doesn't it really doesn't make sense, from just a financial standpoint. And also the coaching carousel in general, Max, Dave Aranda, I think, has, outside of a total collapse these last 3 games, taken himself right off of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sam Pittman probably off the hot seat in Arkansas with another win or 2 there. And maybe anyway, just because they've seen some uptick this year regardless. There's not a lot of, doom and gloom around the coaches. Now there's some people that are stressed. Neil Brown, is probably on a little bit of a hot seat, maybe Brent Venables, but ultimately the way the 12-team playoff and the calendar works, we might see a pretty slow churn on the coaches this year, don't you think?
I do. Like, if you're talking about the other options for Florida, it's like, okay, well, we kind of need Ole Miss to lose to Georgia this weekend because we can't have Ole Miss in the playoff, because if Ole Miss is in the playoff, we can't hire their coach. Like, it just doesn't – if you're going to make a coaching change, and I'm sure Scott Strickland did this, like, you got to survey the candidates and the possibility of, like, what if we can't hire some of these guys at the end of November? And so that's just, as the schedule gets stretched out here, I think that makes it a little bit tougher to kind of pull off that home run hire that you're dreaming of if you want to spend all that money. And I think some of these schools do not want to. And, I agree with you. I think that this, there could always be surprises, but I do think we're setting up for a coaching carousel that is a little milder than usual. And maybe that is, in some ways, it's because some of these situations that are in a bad shape, like a USC or Florida State, like the buyouts are prohibitively expensive. And some of them, like Arkansas and Baylor and Florida, I guess now, like, to their credit, they stepped up this year and were able to get better and spend to get better, and they avoided collapses this year. And so, certainly those kinds of jobs, people circled those and expected those to open, and those coaches were able to overcome the pressure. And so, I don't think there's, obviously none of the Power 5 jobs have opened up yet. And, I don't know that there's going to be a ton of big time jobs that everybody wants that are just going to open up at the end of the regular season here. I could be surprised, could be wrong, but yeah, right now it's not really trending in that direction.
I mean, look, if he told me it was 5, I'd be like, okay, because that's what it would be now. Like if Mac Brown retires, if Neil Brown goes, pick 3 that we're not even thinking about right now for what.
Or like a Kyle Whittingham or a Mike Gundy kind of gets fed up or some of those sorts of things. Yeah, like some of those are, or Kirk Ferentz or some of those. Like I'm not saying those are going to happen, but North Carolina might be a decent example. But they're just when you talk with when you talk to people on the personnel side, you talk to agents. Like I just don't think people are expecting a lot of vacancies right now that everybody's fighting over. And then you kind of turn your attention, just like Florida, to then okay, then it's all about what do we got to do to kind of retain our players, because there's going to still be a ton of poaching going on if there's not a ton of players hitting the portal because of coaching changes.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people don't want to get Jimmy Sexton right now either. Florida State's feeling that, like they have to make some decisions. With the coaching staff at large. Mike Norvell's not going anywhere. He just signed a $10 million a year contract less than a year ago. So they have to give him time to figure it out. But you don't, I think there's, given the ever-changing world, and now, again, you can't just throw money around because you have to share it with someone for the first time ever. You can't buy a third private jet because the other two, you need one to go west and the other one goes north and south, the other goes east. Like you can't do that, right? You can't just be that, rich guy throwing money around, because now you actually have people that all share in it.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to say Texas A&M did it. It's like I think that was an outlier. I think that's the exception. That is not what other schools are sort of. No matter how mad you are, that's just not something that many schools are capable of financially pulling off to kind of check like the Aggies did last year. And so that being said, there will definitely, and we've touched on a couple of them. There will definitely be other schools like Florida that are going to go into this portal cycle and say, man, we've got to spend some money. We got to get a lot better fast, because there are going to be situations like Oklahoma, like Florida State, like USC, where it's like, man, we're really disappointed and feeling a little pressure now, and now we got to get something going here. So I do think it's going to be pretty competitive in December in terms of the top talent, and I think Florida sticking with Napier. It gives them a chance to have a little bit better finish in recruiting. Now that there's a little, you don't really have certainty there, but at least that there's not necessarily that cloud hanging over him that he could be fired any day now.
What about your thoughts on Dave Aranda and what he has now accomplished this season at Baylor, where a month ago I would have told you, we're counting the days. It's just a matter of when, not if. Now, I mean, they have – not only have they won 3 games in a row, they've looked dang good doing it.
They have, yeah, and it's a credit to Dave Aranda and the coach. Certainly it's a credit to making a good change in terms of bringing in Jake Spavital, in terms of figuring out what they had in Sawyer Robertson. Obviously it took some pretty important changes, but I remember talking to Mac Rhodes a year ago, who kind of felt when things were really struggling, who felt like, we've just got some really good freshmen on this team. We're just not there this year, but you feel like there's some talent on this team that's going to develop and give you a chance to be a lot more competitive in the Big 12. And I think we're seeing that play out. But I think it's a testament to a coaching staff and to the buy-in of the players that, you're supposed to get better from September to October. And this team really did. I think they were one of the more impressive teams in the Big 12, not just, who they beat, but how they beat them. And so, I think that gives you a feeling like, okay, yeah, this is pointing back in the right direction. And it took certainly, took paying some players, and it took making some important changes here. But it looks like something that's a little bit more sustainable now than just kind of a 1-year fix, flash in the pan.
Colorado, Texas Tech this week on Big Noon Kickoff. The Tech is a team that needed a big win last week, got it at Iowa State, which is not an easy place to win. Colorado's just been, nothing but good the last month and a half of the season and improving. Still can't run the ball, but they do everything else well enough to win and sometimes spectacular enough to win. Got the leading Heisman candidate. This one should be a plethora of points scored. Max, big one, though, I think, not necessarily for Deion Sanders, even though winning it keeps them very much in the thick of the conference race, but a really big one, I think, for Joey McGuire when it comes to putting Tech in a bigger spot on the map.
I think that's right. And, you have to tip your cap to Joey McGuire and his staff with all the stuff they were dealing with during the week last week that I was having to cover, for them to, kind of rally around and go to Ames and out tough Iowa State in the rain in a tough game. I thought that was really impressive. And I know Iowa State's pretty banged up, but, certainly I think a lot of people had a lot of questions about Texas Tech's defense after you gave up 59 against Baylor and you lose to TCU. I thought what they did in holding Iowa State 22 was a nice statement and one that gives you some encouragement as you go play Shadur Sanders and all the weapons he has at Colorado. I think things are, if you're a Colorado fan, if you're Deion Sanders, you feel like, man, we're exactly where we want to be going into November. And I think if you win this game, and you got Utah next, and obviously Utah's down right now, it really sets up nicely for Colorado in terms of having a chance to make it to Arlington. I mean, really, you look at what's left on the schedule, at Texas Tech, Utah, at Kansas, obviously in neutral site there at Arrowhead, and then home against Oklahoma State, also down. So this is really set up perfectly for the Buffs. And, they were already kind of a must-watch team. So if they pull this off in Lubbock, you're going to see them shoot up the rankings, and you're going to see way more conversation, not just around the Heisman part, but around Colorado as a playoff team.
Max, the Big 12 really it's a four-team race right now. Kansas State, Colorado, Iowa State, and obviously BYU's undefeated going to the Holy War this week. What did the playoff rankings tell you about the way the conference is viewed by the committee right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the part I was most curious about going into that first ranking is what kind of respect would the committee put on BYU and Indiana, and to have BYU at 9. I think if you're a Big 12 homer, you're looking at that and you're saying that's a little disrespectful. Obviously, I'm not necessarily surprised by it. I think BYU and same goes for Indiana. They've been dominant. I think BYU just is not getting enough credit for the accomplishments they have on the resume. To have a win over SMU, who's all the way up to 13 now in the playoff rankings, to have a dominant win over K-State, who's in the top 20. You can question the strength of schedule or whatever, but I think they've really handled their business, and I think it probably deserves to be 8-0 and only be 9th. I think is a little suspect, and they've got a chance to prove it here going forward. But I do think with Iowa State losing, it is going to be a little bit tougher for the Big 12 to pull off that second bid, and honestly, it's probably going to take. If a BYU is 11-1 or 12-0 and high up in the rankings and they lose the conference title game, that might be the conference's best chance of sneaking in an extra team into the playoff. But obviously, with the way that this league race has gone, I think it's kind of hard to assume that the Big 12 champ is going to be 13-0. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun in November. I'm not sure that it's setting up to easily get into the field though.
Does Nebraska get their bowl eligibility? Period. Any of the last few games. Do they get there?
I think so. I can't tell you here's the game they're definitely going to win. But I think they will get to 6. You needed to beat UCLA though. There's no question about that. And now, is it getting a home win over Wisconsin? I think that's probably your second best chance. I mean, they go to USC next week, and you're getting Jane Maiava in that game, which is a little bit tougher to prepare for. I think he's really dynamic, and I think he's going to be pretty fun to watch in Lincoln Riley's offense. And I'm not sure. I think they liked Miller Moss so much that it was hard to make that change. But I think Maiava is going to be a problem and tough to defend. So you need to get Dylan Raiola healthy, and between the USC and the Wisconsin game, I think you gotta win one of those, because I think going on the road to Iowa, there's nothing more the Hawkeyes would love than to crush Nebraska's dreams when they come in at 5-6. So I think that you gotta steal one of these. I think Matt Rule will find a way to get there, but certainly this week you see the fan base very upset with the OC Marcus Satterfield, and you see Dana Holgorsen coming in to consult. It'll be interesting to see, does Nebraska look a little bit different offensively coming out of this bye week?
Marcus Satterfield notwithstanding, but they have been given, and Matt Rule has never had a quarterback like this. He's also never had a really dynamic offense. I mean, their teams are, they've had good offenses, but not great offenses. Do they maybe need to change the philosophy offensively to take advantage fully of what Raiola can do? Because this is a first for Matt Rule. Like, even in the NFL, I know we had Baker Mayfield for a second, but even then, that's kind of a nebulous thing. He's never had a quarterback like this.
Yeah, it's true, and I've asked Matt Rule that. We've talked about that a little bit about he's never really coached a 5-star like this, right? So it's a little bit. I think they've handled it well, but it is a different expectation. And I think the thing that's frustrating when you watch Nebraska is just over the first 4 games. The final one there being Illinois, which they went to overtime and lost to a good Illinois team. But I think over the first 4 games, you felt like, man, Dylan Raiola is playing with a lot of confidence. There was a lot of, this offense was pointing in the right direction. There's a lot of potential there. They can move the ball down the field. They can score points. It just seemed like it was really heading in a good direction, that they had good pieces. And Nebraska hasn't, it regressed over October, and that wasn't really necessarily due to a ton of injuries. That was the problem last year, but not really this year. They've got the same guys out there. It's just become a lot more difficult to move the ball. So I think that, it's a good chance for them to kind of reflect and figure out, self-scout and figure out what's wrong here, or how the adjustments that opponents have made to make things tougher on Dylan Raiola and their run game, what do you do to combat that? So, yeah, it's a trying time, and the fan base is a little worried at the moment for sure. But you just got to kind of find a way to get that spark back.
Absolutely. Max Olson, ESPN.com. Stop rate for this week out now. Still Tennessee at number 1, Army at number 2. Army has not trailed in a game this season, Max, at all. And they've got North Texas this week. I think that streak might get broken. I still think they win. Yeah.
I think that Eric Morris and those guys will figure out a way to score some points on them. But Army's, you look at just how they're doing it defensively. They're so impressive. If you look at their stop, you take out garbage time, their stop rate in terms of getting stops on defense is over 90%. Those guys, they get off the field, they get the ball back to their offense, and their offense just chews clock. But just the way that they control games and limit possessions on offense and defense, it's so impressive. Obviously, it's a veteran team, but they execute what they're trying to do extremely well. So definitely not ruling out the possibility that they make this playoff field. I think it's obviously Bryson Daly's got to get healthy, but that is a team that they know what they're doing, and they out execute everybody they played so far.
Absolutely. Max Olson, ESPN.com. Max, we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Paul.
All right. Max Olson, always a great interview.